Good evening, everyone. Let me make sure by somebody acknowledging that you can hear me. Stuart, can you hear me? I see the thumbs up. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you all for joining us for today's virtual meeting of the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee. I'm Jim Roosevelt from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I normally would be along with my great co-chair, Lorraine Miller from the great state of Texas. She is not able to join us this evening because of an important family matter. So I serve as co-chair of the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee, but tonight I'm all you got. Won't be as good, but it's what you got. Okay. It was great seeing everybody in person at the winter meeting in Washington. Thank you for joining us for our third meeting of March. As you are all aware, we have an intense schedule of meetings coming up in the next couple of months, and we thank all of you for your service on this committee. Our meeting today is an official meeting of the committee, and it is being live streamed on the DNC's YouTube channel. To begin our meeting, please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We need to make sure that we have a quorum at this meeting. To call the roll, I will now recognize our steadfast parliamentarian, Helen McFadden. Helen, would you please call the roll? And Helen, we are waiting for you to either be unmuted or.
Okay, they gave me permission. There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Okay, so how about, so that we don't have this problem as I call the roll, just stick up your thumb or raise your hand or something. I'll look and we won't have to worry about you getting unmuted, if that's okay.
Can feel free to say something also, but we'll look for the visual sign.
Yeah, Mr. Applebaum, I see you. Thank you. Ms. Blanco, I believe I saw you earlier. Are you still here?
Yes, and she just came up on the screen.
I'm here.
Okay, good. Ms. Brazil.
Presente.
Good afternoon. Mr. Brennan.
Present.
I saw you. Good. Mr. Burgos.
Presente.
Good afternoon. Ms. Cardona.
Presente.
Good afternoon. Mr. Curry. See ya. Ms. Daughtry. I see ya.
Presente.
Ms. Dowdell.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Olete.
I'm here.
Thank you. Ms. Fowler. I see ya. Mr. Heredia. I have seen him.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Kmark. See you. Thank you. Mr. Leon. I see you. Ms. Lewis. I see you waving. Mr. Locke. Is he here? Ms. McGarrick.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Martin.
Here.
I heard him. Ms. Martinez. Mr. McDonald.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. McGlinchey. I thought I had seen him. I do see him, yes. Mr. Mitchell.
Here.
Mitchell. Okay. Ms. Moore. Ms. Mount.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Ray.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Saunders. Don't see him. Mr. Spate.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Weingarten. Okay. Ms. Williams. Ms. Swicker. Okay. You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. McFadden, and thank you all for being here. Everyone should be aware that you're all being streamed, not just the speakers. So you should be aware that you are on camera, okay? Always good to know that. So, as Helen has told us, we do have a quorum, which is constituted by 40%. That would be 14 of the members present in person or by proxy. The party's bylaws contain an attendance requirement, as you know. Members who miss 3 consecutive RBC meetings are deemed to have resigned from the committee. Registering a proxy, while it's important for establishing a quorum and assuring your vote is represented, does not count for the purpose of attending a meeting. For today's Zoom meeting, please keep in mind that members will be muted unless they are recognized to speak, at which point they will be introduced and unmuted by the staff. If you would like to be recognized, please use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. It's usually at the bottom. It's possible in your configuration it's on the side, but usually at the bottom. When you raise your hand, Farah and Jenna will create a speaker's queue. When it is your turn to speak, Farah will announce you and the staff will unmute you. We will do our best to call on everyone in the order you seek recognition, but please be patient with us. As we get underway with today's Rules and Bylaws Committee meeting and the work ahead for this committee, I think we are being joined by a special guest. Is that correct, Veronica?
Yes, that's correct.
Pardon me? That is correct. Okay. So he is a lifelong Democrat who is always fighting for a better, fairer, and brighter future for every American. As DNC chair, he is a driving force in the success of our party and is continually working to build the next generation of Democratic talent. We are honored to have DNC chair Jamie Harrison with us today. Mr. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for being here. It is so good seeing you all. It was so great to see you all in Washington, D.C. I know Lorraine can't be with us this evening, but I want to thank her and thank Jim for their continued leadership and all of their hard work. And I want to thank our staff as well in the Political Affairs Department for their efforts, because I know they work so hard to pull these meetings together. You know, I said this at our last meeting, and I'm going to say it again because I think it's something that we have to make sure it reflects. You know, our party is best when we reflect the people we are trying to serve. And I want folks to understand that this process, like all of the processes that we have gone through time and time again after each election cycle, will be open, it will be accessible, and it will incorporate the diverse perspectives that make our party strong. Our goal here is to build a delegate selection process that reflects the values of the Democratic Party, that puts us in the strongest position to keep the White House in 2024. But there's something much larger than that, my friends. What you all are doing here, and many of you have done it before and done it for a very long time, you are building the process by which our party selects its nominee for the most powerful position on this planet, and that's President of the United States. And so I hope no one, the members or people watching or Americans out there, take this stuff lightly, because it's that important. We need to see this process as an opportunity to encourage states to highlight their strengths, encouraging states to share the ways that they embody Democratic Party values. And these things give us yet another opportunity to highlight why it's so important that we elect Democrats at every level all across the country. Today isn't the first or the last time that we're going to discuss this calendar. We will have 3 national virtual listening sessions this year to make sure that we're hearing the voices of Democrats across the country. And I also hope to have a town hall with our co-chairs of the Rules and Bylaws Committee as well. Your input is important. It will always be important. So I want to thank the committee again for the work that you all will do in the coming weeks and months, the work that you have done already. I want you to know it is indeed my privilege and honor to work alongside each and every one of you. So thank you again for the hard work. Thank you for the dedication to this party. The work you all do is so, so important. It's at the heart of what we do at the DNC. So thank you again. Floor back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chair Harrison. It's really great to have that welcome. It's great to have you acknowledge all the effort that the members of our committee put in here. And together with you, I want to also acknowledge the team with whom we will be working throughout this process, and who work tirelessly to make sure our meetings run smoothly. You've already met our parliamentarian, Helen McFadden. In addition, we have the staff of the Office of Party Affairs and Delegate Selection, Office Assistant Jenna Whitaker. One moment here, that was a grandson calling in, so I had to get rid of that for a minute, but I will call him back a little bit later. Okay. We also have, in addition to Jenna Whitaker, our PADS advisor, Rick Boylan, and our PADS intern, Zoe Rogers. Please also joining is our newly announced PADS director, Veronica Martinez Roman. Many of you had the chance to meet her in DC. As you know, Veronica has recently transitioned into the role of director as Rob Engel is navigating some family issues and will be taking over the party's diversity portfolio. Our thoughts are with Rob, who will continue as a great resource for our committee in his new position. And Rob will be particularly focusing on disability issues. We also greatly appreciate all of the help from our DNC counsel, Graham Wilson and Andy Levin. Andy Levine is a member of Congress, Andy Levine. Running our Zoom meeting today is Charlie Espino, the DNC's operation manager, and helping us recognize members seeking recognition to speak is Farah Sabir, the executive assistant in the secretary's office. Thank you, one and all. If you have any questions about the work of the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee, please don't hesitate to contact me or anyone on our amazing team. As we discussed at our last meeting, and again in our email to you a week ago, as we listened to the discussions in this committee over the past 2 months, it became clear to us that we needed to be prepared for a pre-window review process. Our most recent meeting reaffirmed the belief that we needed to be prepared for this process, and so we have now brought this draft framework in front of you for discussion. We asked party affairs staff to sketch out what such a process would look like, drawing on the input of committee members through our initial meetings, past precedent, and some ideas that we had for how this could work. One such past process was the Price-Herman Commission, which I served on in 2005, and the subsequent Rules and Bylaws Committee process that came out of these recommendations. That commission produced a report that was used by the Rules and Bylaws Committee in 2006 in drafting the rules for the 2008 delegate selection process. That process worked well, and it provided state parties, stakeholders, and the committee the ability to conduct a thorough review of applications with a clear process and timeline. And it is good practice in any organization to look at past precedent when you are embarking on efforts like these. The Price-Herman Commission was led by great Democrats, Congressman David Price, and our former co-chair of Rules and Bylaws, former Secretary of Labor, Alexis Herman. They did a great job in incorporating the many ideas that were brought forward and producing a report that reflected what we heard in those meetings. Donna Brazil was also a member of that commission. And I'd like to ask you, Donna, if you would be willing to add a few thoughts about it.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. As a member of the Rules and Bylaws Committee during the Price-Herman Commission, I would like to say personally, and after reading this resolution, that I support it. It sets up the right kind of process. It's transparent, open, clear, and it's an opportunity for any state and the District of Columbia to make its case. As a member of the Price-Herman Commission, I watched the Rules and Bylaws Committee create a process that worked well when it came to time to operationalize the Commission's recommendations. I think it's right to build on that process as a starting point, and I think the resolution does a good job of that. As you all know, we were successful in 2008 in capturing the presidency. We were successful in 2012. We were not so successful in 2016 as we fell short about 25,000 votes, but we were also successful with over 81 million Americans supporting our ticket in 2020. I think it's right to build on this process again as a starting point, and we have a good model to work with. I hope we do not delay this process because I don't believe we need a new commission. I believe my colleague Frank requested a copy of the Price-Herman Commission. You will see the depth and breadth of the conversations we had across the country with not just Democratic Party officials. This was not a grass top exercise. This was a grassroots exercise. We brought in outside experts. We brought in state officials, party activists, party leaders, and you can just, tell from the number of conversations we had across the country, the number of hearings that we heard from a lot of people, a lot of activists, and people really brought into the process. We know what the criteria are, and we've been talking about it for years. What we want is to close out that first month of the nominating process with a lineup of inclusive contests that engage the diverse groups that we need. That's my dog. It's okay that we finally got mail delivered, so she's happy too. It might be from Chewy.com. But we know that we can engage more diverse groups that we need to help us win in the general election. So it's time for us, Mr. Chairman, I think, to take a hard look at this. As I mentioned, I've gone through it line by line. And I know some of my other colleagues who served on the Price-Herman Commission can also discuss their recommendations as well. But again, I want to just go on record to support this. Sorry. I adopted her and she rescued me, but it's not Chewy.com. But I would like to go on record in supporting this resolution because, again, I believe it sets up the right process, transparent, open, clear, and an opportunity for any state, the District of Columbia, and our territories to make their case as well. So with that, I yield back the balance of my time. And Zora will not interrupt anymore.
No, it's great to have the canine confirmation. So we have a couple of members who've raised their hands, and I'm going to call on Frank Leone next for some comments.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I was not on the Price-Herman Commission, but when the it became clear that in this year we would be taking a look at the calendar issues. I did go back to it and I asked that it be circulated to the group, and I'm glad that it was. I think the resolution that has been circulated that addresses the principles and procedures for review of the 2024 nominating calendar is an excellent document. It does a good job of summarizing the history and setting forth the criteria that will guide our work going forward. I do think that the commission report did a very good job of taking a look at the issues that we're facing the DNC at the time in consideration of the Rule 12 timing issue, and looking at the diversity, representation, and participation in our process. So I think it's a real important document and a good starting point. But I'd also note that it's been 4 cycles since then. So I think it's very appropriate for this committee to take another look at the calendar, including at the pre-window period. It's important for this committee to do so in a manner that is fair, transparent, and open. And so I urge my fellow members of the committee to endorse the proposal that's been set forth and look forward to discussion of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And our committee member, Elaine Kmark, also has some commentary.
Yeah, thank you. I endorse the resolution, and I also think, following in the manner of the Price-Herman Commission, it would be good to hear from not just the states that are interested in going forward, but to hear from some of my colleagues in the field of political science. They don't always have the right things to say, for sure, but some of them have thought about this and covered it and written about it for a long time. So I thought it would be just a suggestion to the staff that we could do that. In addition, I'd like to apologize, but also introduce you to Morley Winograd, who mistakenly got on this link, not on the Observer link. But Morley is listening in along with the public. Morley was the chair of the Winograd Commission, which created the window in the first place. And I hope at some point down the road, we will actually hear from Morley as part of our deliberations. And I just want to let Morley know that when I explained to the staff that Morley was interested in listening in on this, the staff's first reaction was, "He's still alive." So I just want to tell you,
I knew that.
Morley is indeed alive and well. He is participating with the public on this call, and I hope that, in addition to some of the political scientists who are interested in this, down the road we'll hear from some people who have been active in this in the past.
So, Elaine, I would have assured staff that Morley is a living legend.
Yes.
Welcome, Morley. And we're only having committee members speak today, but I look forward to hearing from you in the future. Now, I believe, Maria, do you have your hand raised?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I also want to thank the co-chairs and the staff of the committee for getting this discussion draft together. I really think it's such a pertinent discussion to have. And this framework in particular is one that I support because I think it does a really good job of just really capturing the sentiment of this committee over the first several conversations we've had this year. We know that this has been an issue on voters' minds. We know that the openness and the transparency of the party has been an issue for several cycles now. And so for that reason, to so many of you all that I have talked to and that have also chimed in on this, both understand why I support, and you all have told me that you support as well, reviewing the pre-window period, with an eye towards diversity and improving our ability to win elections in November. We all know that that is what it's all about. And you can't do that, especially as the party of diversity, if we don't actually implement a process that is trustworthy and open and transparent, that also reflects all of the diverse communities that we say that we represent and that actually reflect the country. I got to thinking about this whole thing, frankly, during the hearings of Ketanji Brown Jackson, the amazing judge that is before the Supreme Court, or before the Senate right now, as a Supreme Court nominee. She was incredible. She was amazing, so overqualified for this position. But I think what came to mind just over and over again is how historic it was, that this was a Black woman who for the first time was nominated and is going to be confirmed. I have no doubt she's going to be confirmed to the highest court in the land. And it's both a moment to be proud of, but also kind of jaw-dropping that this hasn't happened before. And so again, it just kind of goes to show what a living, breathing institution the Supreme Court is, that it is changing as the country changes. And we have to do exactly the same thing, again, if we are going to be really representative of the people that are not just are part of our party, but are part of this great country, and of all the diverse communities that we say we represent, that our values represent. And so, we've had these discussions, these first several meetings, and I don't think anyone can really argue that this is the exact right discussion to have at this moment. So I think this resolution lays out the right process that not only achieves the goals of diversity, inclusion, transparency, but it does so in a fair and just manner. And as we discussed a couple of weeks ago, all the states who have an interest in going early are going to have a chance to make their case. And I don't think anyone can argue that that is the fair way to put this forward, right? That no one is going to have a leg up on anybody else. If everyone is going to be allowed to make the case for why they believe they should go in that early window, they have the same exact opportunity to do so than all of the other states and territories that make up this incredibly amazing, dynamic process that we call the nomination process. So, as I've said before, we can't just continue to do the same thing over and over again because it's tradition or because it's the status quo. Our country is changing. We need to change with it. So I urge my fellow committee members to support this resolution. Gracias.
Thank you, Ms. Cardona. Mr. Curry, do you have your hand raised?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to thank the co-chairs for pulling this draft document together. I do believe it's the right framework, and it's the framework that's right on track. I'm heartened by the inclusion of the public hearings in this plan. I think it's important to be able to hear from the nation. I think it's very critical that this process continue to be as transparent and open and inclusive process, and ensure that groups and stakeholders across the country that make up the heart of our party have the opportunity to truly have their voices heard in this process. To that end, I would encourage my fellow committee members to ensure that our international unions also have the opportunity to present their views in these meetings. International unions make up they make huge commitments across the nation, and they're active parts of all of our communities, and they actually represent a true demographic of what our actual nation looks like each and every day. I understand that this was also done in 2005 and 2006, and I think it would be a tremendous value again if this would take place in 2022. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ray. So in this section, I'm going to ask for one more comment from Carol Fowler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was not on the Price Herman Commission, but I have endured a number of these changes over time. I have sat through a lot of RBC meetings where we discussed this kind of changes, and I think this framework as a whole is good. But I have a couple of questions. In previous incarnations of this, and I just realized I should close the blind. I'm sorry, I have all this sunlight over my face, but maybe that's for good. In previous discussions, when we've made this kind of significant changes or alterations to our process, we have heard from presidential candidates and campaigns who have, they have their own interests, but we have always put first our desire to create a process that would give us a nominee who is best equipped to win. And we've heard from campaigns and we've heard from actual candidates. And I want to be sure that as we go through this process, we hear from, my hope is that we'll only have one candidate in 2024. I think just for posterity's sake, we need to hear from some people who maybe are not running a presidential campaign this time, but will be in the future, have in the past, have that kind of experience. And which brings me to the thing that presidential candidates have always wanted from us, which is that the early states be small states. And I do not see that listed in this framework. And presidential campaigns have very good reasons for that. It has to do with cost. It has to do with a candidate who's not well known being given a benefit by campaigning in small states before they move on to larger states. I do hope that will be something we can consider.
Thank you, Carol, and we will return to those questions. I think we have one more member with his hand raised before we move to the next section. Stuart, did you have a comment?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. I was also pleased to see the document. I think it's very good. And it reminds me, as Maria said, that this is a living, changing process where we're trying to make it better all the time, and we're trying to improve that. I had the opportunity to read Elaine K. Mark's marvelous book on the nominating process. And the sense you get from reading that is you're constantly trying to make the process better. And I think one place where I hope we are able to make it better is reflected in the pillar that we have that talks about administration and talks about fair, transparent, and inclusive processes to choose our nominee. And I think under that framework, I'm going to be looking at how we ensure maximum participation from eligible voters who may face obstacles because they may be working people, they may be single parents, they may have parental responsibilities, and that we want to make sure that they have a meaningful opportunity to participate. I'm delighted to be part of this committee, and I have to tell you, what makes me even happier is that I've had the opportunity to see Morley Winograd's face again as we began this meeting, because he has one of the best minds that I've ever come across relating to the things we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart, and I will second that emotion. Now we're going to move to with this helpful context that's been set. We're going to move to the framework that we're dealing with. You can see many elements that we've incorporated into the draft framework resolution. We committed to a transparent process that took into account the diverse views represented on this committee and within the party. To that end, we want to discuss this proposed framework with all of you so that we can ensure that the document we send to you for a vote in April closely reflects this body's thinking. Farah, will you please pull the draft framework up onto the screen? That's because nobody should trust me to do screen sharing. As we begin this review, let's move into the resolved clauses of the resolution and discuss what aspects here belong in the final draft. And I believe Leah Daughtry has some comments first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to all of my colleagues on the Rules Committee. Thank you for bringing this back to our awareness as we consider what our normal duty is, which is to review the presidential nominating process every 4 years. I'm grateful for this discussion document, and I think it's the right direction to go in, and I hope that we will all support it, particularly the articulation of a transparent and open and clear process. I was not on the Price-Herman Commission, but I was the chief of staff at the DNC during the Price-Herman Commission, and I remember it very, very well. And I think one of the hallmarks was that it was transparent. The process was transparent. The decision-making that went into it, the presentations that went into how we got to the 4 states that we have now. And I think it's important for us to remember that this is our job and it's part of the Democratic Party's process that I especially am proud of, that we understand that we cannot be stuck in a 50-year-old calendar when we're trying to win 2022 and 2024 elections, that it has to be an ever-evolving process, an ever-evolving consideration. And to that note, I want to be sure that I say that this idea of considering the changing electorate is so important. Our country is very different than it was when we first set up the window and the pre-window process. Much has changed demographically. Where people live has changed demographically. The composition of states, even the large states, are different. I'm a New Yorker, and people think of New York as a blue state, but we've got rural communities in upstate New York that are far, far different from the states that are, from the cities that are downstate, which is not to say that I'm advocating for New York to go early. I'm just making the point that states are very different. And particularly when we consider rural Americans, as many of you know, I do a lot of work in rural America. And right now in America, 25% of rural American is African Americans. African Americans comprise 25% of rural America. And when you add Latino Americans and Native Americans, rural America is nearly 40% people of color. And we need to ensure that that kind of diversity is considered as we are thinking about our process and the states that need to have a say in who our nominee is. And as my mama said, you dance with who brung you. And so we ought to be able to include those who show up for us every single election cycle. They show up for us, and they ought to have the primary say in who our nominee becomes and be able to influence that process early and throughout the process. And so that's why I'm really glad that we're doing this, that we're reviewing it in a broad and open manner with these particular considerations around the framework, and looking forward to the discussion ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Bishop Daughtry. And I'm going to ask Farah if, as we proceed through this discussion, if you can gradually put up on the screen the succeeding pages of the draft resolution so that our viewers can see what we're talking about.
Will do, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Now, I want to remind everybody that you should use the raise hand feature or send a chat message to either Jenna or Farah so that staff can let me know to recognize you. I want to ask if there is anyone else who would like to speak at this point. If so, please raise your hand. If not, we will move on to our next portion of our discussion. Mr. Brennan, I think, has raised his hand.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, I've obviously reviewed this document very carefully. And I think that the whereas clauses that appear on the first page appear to me to be appropriate for what should be a guiding principle for this committee. I would, you know, just remind folks that I do think that the ultimate goal of what this committee should be doing appears in the second whereas clause at the end, which says, and ultimately produces the strongest possible Democratic nominee for president. That has to be our touchstone. And I just want to make sure that we keep that in mind as we go forward in this process.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. David McDonald, do you have your hand up? And if you do, would you unmute yourself? David, you are still muted.
Mute. Can you hear me now, as they say in the commercial?
Now I can hear you, and you know, we've all been trying to learn this for 2 years.
Yes, well, probably the most important part of my comments were the ones that came while I was muted, but
well, make them again.
Yeah, the first thing I wanted actually just to ask a question. You referred to we'll take up things in the next section, and I don't know what the sections are, so I
mean the next part of this discussion. That's all I mean by that.
Right. I'm a little confused as to what the focus is of them. I do have some granular questions about the resolution and some concerns about granular aspects of it. I do not necessarily have concerns about the overview. I do think we ought to be reviewing it. I do generally support the process, but the devil is always in the details in these things.
So I would view that what we've done so far is the first part was the historical perspective on the Price-Harmon Commission. Now in the second part, I think we're beginning to look at the resolution itself, and in particular the whereas clauses that acknowledge the context. So then we'll proceed along those lines.
All right. Well, I will say my questions relate to the resolved areas, so I will raise my hand again when we get to that section. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with a hand raised? I don't see anyone right at this moment. So I want to reassure everyone that we will update the draft for subsequent meetings to be reflective of our conversation today, and that will give us much to discuss at our April meeting before voting on it and beginning the proposal process with our state party partners. As that process begins, we want to be sure we're also considering the voices of our other Democratic partners. We have conducted listening sessions in the past for many processes for the party. We will continue that tradition by arranging for regional listening sessions on our overall process throughout the summer. These sessions will occur virtually, and the staff will share dates for the sessions with us soon. I'd encourage members to join and participate, as this is an opportunity to hear from and ask questions of those who will be affected by our decisions. Does anyone have any thoughts on the listening sessions they'd like to share as we embark on this? Chair Swecker, did you have some comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did very briefly appreciate the discussion draft that you all sent around, and I did have the opportunity to go back and read the report of the Price-Harmon Commission, on which I did serve. Almost 2 decades later, it stands the test of time on how to approach a review of our 2024 presidential nominating process. To me, it was thorough, inclusive, and very intentional in its approach. And moving forward, I think it would be sound and practical to use it as a basis to build from the process we're working from here. This draft plan in its present form provides for input for both state parties and other stakeholders to be heard. I'm all for public hearings. They worked well in 2005. The more input, the better. And we certainly learned how to maneuver through a lot more sophisticated technology the last 2 years to make input even more open and available to the public. And while it's important to hear from state parties, it should be at a separate time and place. That's why I like this idea of setting aside a couple of days for dedicated sessions for state parties to be heard, as the draft plan suggests. So we keep that separate from the actual public hearing process. That way, everybody's input is valued and respected. That's what's in the current draft proposal, which I believe is a solid way to move forward. And with that, I have said my piece. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And by the way, congratulations on your reelection as state chair. Great to have you continue to be with us. Okay. Let's go to Joanne Dowdell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all that had a hand in putting together this framework. As it relates to the listening sessions, I think that in our effort to be as transparent and accessible as possible, that we schedule those sessions at varying times to allow the broadest number of participants to be able to provide feedback and input, rather than set a set date or time, have it vary, because we've got West Coast, South, Northeast, Midwest, different time schedules, different work schedules, that we try to be as accommodating as possible in scheduling those listening sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Mr. Brennan. And you are muted.
There we go.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. And I want to endorse what Ms. Dowdell said. I think that's exactly right. We need to make sure this is open. Carol Fowler raised the point earlier. Per usual, Carol's right. I think it would be very helpful to hear from presidential campaigns, folks like that, because again, I think the touchstone is electing Democratic presidents. And one of the things I guess I was a little confused about in the resolution under paragraph 4, it said in which party stakeholders are given the opportunity to voice their views. So who determines who these party stakeholders are? Does that mean we're not taking comment from the public? I guess I'm confused as to what that phrase is intended to convey.
Very good question. I think that we will be seeking comments from representative members of state parties. I can't say that we will hear, I don't know yet, because I don't know what kind of response we'll have to this invitation. So if we got 500 requests for people to speak, we'd try to select a representative sampling. If we get 20, we'll probably have everybody. So I can't fully answer the question. I get what you're asking. It won't just be party officials unless that's all we get expressing interest.
Well, I guess, so my suggestion is that, again, if the goal is openness, transparency, then I think we need to make sure that it's a very open process in which how they're determined who is going to speak at these sessions.
I think that's a very good piece of guidance. Thank you. All right. Anyone else with their hand raised at this point? Yes, Leah Daughtry. And I think you may be muted.
There we go. I was waiting to be unmuted. Mr. Chairman, I think to Ms. Fowler's earlier question in Mr. Brennan, and perhaps this is not for today, but it would probably be helpful for us to have a good timeline around when these decisions must be made. As to my recollection, we may not have presidential candidates by the time that we need to make these decisions, but I don't quite recall. So I think it would be helpful for staff to give us sort of a timeline of when the dates need to be announced, the window needs to be announced, et cetera.
I will ask staff to send that out. Just in general, I will say our goal is to have our report ready for the late August or September full DNC meeting. So I think you're quite right, Leah, that there may not be presidential campaigns other than the incumbents campaign. We will certainly might hear from some who have been candidates in the past who want to at least express their views, even though they wouldn't define themselves as candidates at this time. Anybody else? Thank you, Leah. Anybody else with comments?
Mr. Chair, David McDonald has asked to be recognized.
Yes, David.
I think I figured out the muting this time.
You did.
I think we kind of bled over into discussing the be it resolved, the actual operative parts of the resolution. And I do have some questions and concerns there. And I to some extent apologize to the committee for this being granular, but in my experience, what's probably going to happen is we've had this discussion today. We're going to come back at our next meeting and we'll have a kind of a finished resolution that we need to vote on. We will not necessarily be discussing it too much, and we've got a lot of activity going forward. So I want to get my granular comments into the queue now. Among the things that I'm concerned about, I would like a little bit more clarity on, well, let me back up a second. This resolution contemplates that we will adopt it at some point, and within 7 days, we'll notify the state parties of the rules and procedures that they have to follow to make their application. That presupposes we're going to draft rules and procedures at some point. I'm kind of curious as to when we will see them and how we will discuss them. I'm curious as to how we will know what the application form looks like, because to some extent in an evaluation process, the questions that you ask determine somewhat the criteria that are coming back. And I know that the timeline that is set out contemplates that there will be a deadline for applications to come in, and then there will be some type of evaluation and a winnowing process, or winnowing done to say a shorter list will come back and make public presentations to the committee. If somebody could flesh out how the evaluation process will go, and will that be something that the committee discusses? Will it be something that for transparency, people will see the evaluations, or is the contemplation that only the eventual public presentations from the short list will be seen? I have a concern that we make sure we think about the side effects. As Elaine said at the last meeting, some of where we find ourselves now is an unanticipated consequence of reforms we made in the past. And our existing window has consistent, I think, with the Price-Herman Commission's intent, done what it could to avoid front loading. The states that are up front are basically smaller states, more accessible to startup candidates. They're not major media markets. The bulk of the delegates are elected in the window as opposed to up front. I hope that we will continue to have the upfront window be as accessible as possible to candidates and not slide into a situation where essentially we end up with 4 large states up front and an election decided based on mass media markets. It's not explicitly part of the Price-Herman report. And obviously, as others have said, things change over time. But I do think that that is a risk as we see some of these applications come in, that we may inadvertently limit our process by creating a gate that only people with a lot of advance money raised well in advance and a lot of television advertising can even hope to pass through. I am concerned when I see the number 5 in the draft resolution of no more than 5 states. I don't know why that's there, but I do think, as I think Ken Martin made the point last time, that we need to make sure we have one state in every region. We cannot afford to write off a region of the country. And in our quest for competitiveness, we cannot ignore areas that we're not yet winning, because over time, the number of areas that we're going to win becomes smaller and smaller if we're not competing in areas that we are not presently strong in. I have long been a fan of the 50-state strategy in that regard. Those are my general questions, trying to get some idea of exactly how this is going to go on the compressed timeline, because I do understand we've got meetings in April. We probably have a lot to do, but just a rule drafting process for this and advance, that seems to be ambitious unless we've got something in the works now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. So my intention is to take the thoughts and the questions raised in this meeting and discuss them with our co-chair and bring those thoughts back to our next meeting. You asked whether I think you were asking whether criteria will be applied, I think, just by either staff or co-chairs or something like that, or whether this full committee will be informed of what states are being considered and so on. I can assure you the full committee will be informed regarding all states that are interested in being considered. There may be recommendations from the co-chairs and so on, but the full committee will be informed. When we talk about transparency, I think that definitely applies to every aspect of our discussions. So that is that's my intent, is to, after discussion, bring these thoughts back to the full committee. I think we have a few more hands raised at this point. Jenna, can you tell me who that is? Oh, I can see
Mr.
now.
Chair. Yep, Mr. Chair, Frank Leon has asked to be recognized.
Okay, and just before I go to you, Frank, let me say, I see, David, your hand is raised. Do you have a follow-up on what we were just discussing?
Actually, I wanted to be clear, Jim. My question about the evaluation was not whether the committee necessarily would be informed about the results, but whether the stakeholders would be informed about the basis for the evaluation. When we talk about a process that is transparent, that, we've taken input and we make a decision, that suggests that people hear the reasons, not just the results. That's all.
Thanks for clarifying that, and the answer is yes. As President Biden sometimes answers questions just yes or no, that's a yes. All right, Frank, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. On the subject of transparency, I'm glad that this meeting is being broadcast on the YouTube channel, and I hope that our subsequent meetings are also broadcast that way. And I would hope that we could post a page where we could set forth the schedule, because we're going to be doing an awful lot of things in the next few months, and including notice of the listening sessions, and also post final documents. And I don't think we need to post draft documents, because that might lead to confusion. But I think it is important that this process be transparent. The other, I had also had some minor suggested revisions, and I sent an email to staff. I don't know that we need to take the committee's time on it now, or should I bring it up, or I'll just leave it to your all's consideration.
Want to just, for everyone's information, state what the subject of the
Sure.
email is?
Yeah, it's on page 3, the fourth whereas clause, right above review of rules and bylaws. I have it on, is that page 3? Yeah, right. Yeah, we're the last whereas clause. So it says, whereas following 2016, the Rules and Bylaws Committee adopted the Unity Reform Commission's work. So that seems a little garbled. And I think what you want to do is delete the phrase, the Rules and Bylaws adopted, the Rules and Bylaws Committee adopted. So it just says the unit or something else, but as it's written, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's the first one. The second one is on the third line where it says reduce the number of caucuses in the nominating process. I would suggest it's increase the number of primaries in the nominating caucus because it was a positive thing and putting it in a more positive way. And then the next clause that says reform the superdelegate system. I think I would change that. I think normally our documents refer to them as automatic delegates. And I don't know that we ever had a superdelegate system. So I think we should say something like change the role of automatic delegates.
Thank you. Those are very helpful. And this is as you acknowledge the draft, and so those will be helpful for the next version. And do we have anyone else with their hand raised?
Mr. Chair, Mo Alifi has asked to be recognized.
Mo, please go ahead.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. All right.
You are.
Great. I just want to weigh in with my support for the draft resolution as well. And listening to some of the comments, I actually think just about every concern that I have heard from anyone today, this resolution sets up a process that will allow each of those concerns to be litigated. This is about as open of a process as I think we could have put together. The actual framework for the states, I think, is very reflective of what we have as a committee have discussed. And I think it gives just about every state a chance to make its case. What I like about it is, several people today have talked about making the process as inclusive for candidates as possible. What I like about it is I think it does. I think it gives every state a chance to show how they are as inclusive as possible for candidates. But just as, if not more importantly to me, this makes it as inclusive to voters as possible. And I think that's got to be one of our primary concerns, because as Scott mentioned earlier, and I 1,000% agree, the job of this process is to best set us up to elect the next president of the United States and to win the next election. And I am of the firm belief that the best way to do that is to make the process as inclusive as possible so that we get our candidates in front of as many voters as possible and give as many voters an opportunity to help nominate the next candidate in advance of electing the next president. So I just think this is very well done and addresses many of the concerns that I've heard today.
Thanks very much, Mo. Appreciate those comments.
Oh, Chair Roosevelt, I think we have one additional speaker. Donna Brazil has her hand up.
Okay, great. Ms. Brazil.
Well, I just wanted to conclude today's conversation once again by endorsing this resolution. I think it's a good framework for us to begin this conversation and to I feel like I'm David McDonald. I said most of what I wanted to say out loud, but I want to once again endorse this resolution. I think it's a strong resolution. It includes all of the great pillars that we established back in 2005. And I would hope that we would continue to strengthen those pillars, the diversity that has made our party such a unique party in American politics, where we include everyone who wants to participate in our democracy. And because of that, I just want to make sure when we say state, we often forget the District of Columbia with 3 elected folks.
I always.
I want to make sure that we don't exclude the District of Columbia and the territories from also participating in this process. At least those of us who live in the District of Columbia, we contribute to this country in every way, by being taxpaying American citizens, by fulfilling all of our other obligations. And I just wanted to put that on the record as well, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for reminding us of that. And I always include the district and the territories when we refer to states. So thanks for that. Well, I think we've had an excellent and thoughtful discussion. Before our next RBC meeting on April 13 and 14, I will circulate a revised framework resolution in advance of the meeting. Again, it'll still be a draft because this committee will weigh in on the final version, but that time we'll be able to review it in advance, so that hopefully it can be voted on at that meeting. This framework will allow us to provide states, including the district and the territories, with more specific guidance on the early state process while we finalize overall plans on the delegate selection rules. I hope you continue to feel involved and listened to throughout the process. Please don't hesitate to reach out to both the co-chairs and the staff if you have more suggestions on language before that. With the understanding that the proposed rules and call need to be finalized in time for that summer meeting, as I mentioned, staff will be sending additional scheduling details very soon regarding meetings in May, June, July, and August, along with listening sessions in April, May, and June. As a reference, for the 2020 rules and call, this committee held meetings in January, March, May, June, and July, and the documents were adopted by the full DNC in August. If they could do it, we can do it, okay? Are there any further questions? I don't see anybody raising their hand. One more try, as Lorraine would say. Any questions? Any questions? I don't see any more. So, members, that concludes our agenda for today's Rules and Bylaws Committee meeting. You're going to get a little part of your late afternoon or early evening back. We appreciate your attending this meeting, and we hope you found it informative as we begin the important work ahead of us. We look forward to seeing all of you at our meeting on April 13 and 14. Let me ask once more, any further questions? Hearing and seeing none, I want to thank you again for participating. We also again thank our staff and the production team, as well as our court reporter and the sign language interpreters who appeared on the live stream broadcast. You might be interested to know that our court reporter was also the court reporter for the hearings on Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. So we have a firsthand witness to history here with us as well. We have completed our business today. As such, without objection, the meeting is adjourned.